Hi guys, so GB News since Andrew Neil left has been really going down the toilet, but it does attempt to provide some entertainment. This time we have a few commentators, if that's what they are. I'm a commentator and they won't invite me on GB News. Anyway, the topic for the discussion is Scottish independence, and the ignorance demonstrated here is, how can I put this nicely, shocking. By the way, you would think that when they're talking about Scotland and Scottish independence, they would have a Scottish person on to talk about it. But that tells you what you need to know about the show. Anyway, let's jump in.
Why does she keep hopping on about independence? What was the point of the vote?
Well,
the Scots say they want to stay in the Union.
All that she's got.
And it was the...
Okay, what they're talking about here is Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP were elected to provide a second referendum. They were elected because a majority in Scotland seem to support their policies, which one of them being is independence, or at least a second referendum. So if the people of Scotland continue to vote for a party whose manifesto contains "we want to have a second referendum," then we can take from that the Scottish people would like to have a second referendum. Why do you have a problem with that?
It's supposed to be a vote for a generation. She just keeps going on about this.
Okay, this idea that it was a vote for a generation, it was mentioned in a paper back in 2014 or 2013, I don't remember which, but it was not official policy. But even if it were official policy, even if Nicola Sturgeon said this is going to be a vote for a generation, which she did not, but let's say for the sake of argument she said that. You do understand that politicians change their mind. You do understand that parties evolve and change. You know, the Conservative Party used to be pro-European. Now they're anti-European. Okay? So, if a party can change on something fundamentally like the European Union, surely a party that said one thing back in 2014 can say something different today. Like, if they change and they lose support, then that's their problem. But if they change or say something different today and their support goes up, then isn't it the will of the people? And what they said in the past is pretty much irrelevant.
And I'm like, who is backing you? There was already a vote. Can you just let sleeping dogs lie?
The people of Scotland are backing her and the SNP. That's why they won a majority, or a majority with the Green Party, which is also pro-independence. So if you're asking who is backing you, then the answer is the Scottish people.
I think because she was so convinced that Brexit wouldn't happen, she feels like she has a new crux to be like, actually.
This is where I get to the point. Who invites these people on? Like, what is the criteria for bringing these people on the show? Because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Nicola Sturgeon, in the run-up to the referendum for Scottish independence back in 2014, was one of the only politicians who said, look, she said at the time, there's a referendum coming, probably, for European Union membership. Now, it wasn't fixed at that time, back in 2014. It happened in 2016. But it wasn't fixed yet, but there was talk of it. And she said, look, there's a scenario where if we vote to remain in the Union, the UK Union, and the rest of the UK vote to leave the European Union, we'll be dragged out too. Now, the response from the Labour Party and the Conservatives in Scotland at the time was, that's just rubbish. And that's what happened. Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, and it was dragged out against its will. But for the referendum in 2014 for Scottish independence, the Labour Party and the Tories said, no, you have to vote to remain in the UK in order to maintain EU membership. So that was a misunderstanding of the reality that was about to happen.
actually, no, let's really vote for independence. But I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can't keep changing the rules of the game to suit you.
Well, she's moving the goalposts, Benjamin Butterworth, and the
What are you talking about? Moving the goalposts? What goalposts?
Prime Minister today said, no, you're not getting one.
So if Boris Johnson says, no, you can't have one. Let's, Dan Wootton is a Brexiteer. I would love to ask Dan, so you're happy with Boris Johnson saying to the Scottish government, no, you're not allowed a referendum. You're happy with that. He'd probably turn around and say, yeah, I'm happy with that. And if I were to ask Dan, would you be happy if Brussels back in 2016 said, I'm sorry, we're not going to allow you to leave. We're not going to allow you to have a referendum. If you can have your referendum, but we're not going to recognise it. Would you be happy with that? Probably not.
I mean, look, I don't think that we should have a second independence referendum, at least at the moment. It's very interesting why she's choosing to use this economic argument, because one of the reasons people voted to stay in the UK was fear of what would happen to the money in their pocket.
Yeah.
And there was polling out by YouGov to coincide with this, which shows that that is now a neutral point. People aren't convinced, basically, that they will be poorer if they leave the UK. And she is jumping on that because she knows that is a key section to shift it to independence.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson has made people poorer. Brexit has made people poorer. So it's a good argument, I think, to use. To say, look, we're not going to get any poorer or we'll get richer. Like, do you want to stay in a union that's going to make you poorer and where you have no control over it? Because Boris Johnson doesn't listen to us in Scotland. Boris Johnson doesn't give a crap about us in Scotland. We can try and undo as much damage as we can that Brexit is doing to Scotland, but our hands are tied. That's a pretty strong argument.
But Daisy,
it's very clever what she's
as
doing.
a former economics editor, that's not based in fact, is it? Project Fair, when it came to Brexit, was a load of nonsense, and we now have the proof of that. But
what? Is Dan Wootton living in another world, on another planet, in another time? So Dan Wootton just said here that Project Fear was a load of nonsense. Project Fear, when it came to Brexit, was there will be food shortages. There will be roaming charges. The economy will suffer. European Union citizens will go back to the European Union. And that's happened. And Dan Wootton is saying this is all nonsense? Sorry, what planet does he live on? I see he's in a studio, but is he really there?
I'm sorry, the idea that Scotland can leave the UK and be as financially successful is...
But that's, I mean...
BS, I was going to say.
Okay, so what he's doing here is he's making a positive statement. Then he has to provide evidence to support that claim. You can't just say, yes, this is BS. Then, if he was honest, he would say, look, I'm not convinced by the argument that Scotland would become, just be as economically successful. But one of the arguments that the SNP is making is that we're not successful, we're not being successful at the moment because our hands are tied. If we were independent, we'd be able to control more of our money. At the moment, we can't. So, if you're going to say that Scotland couldn't become a member of the European Union or couldn't be economically successful, then you'll actually have to provide evidence to support that, not just make a blind statement.
Well, it's I mean,
BS.
As I discovered after being...
Is it like that's all you have to say? It's BS. That's your argument? That's the best you can do, Dan? Really? Your response to everything is that's BS. Climate change is an issue. That's BS. Okay. Brexit is damaging. That's BS. That's his response to everything, it seems.
Economics editor for a few years. Pretty much everything that an economist will tell you could be categorised as BS because so much of it is predictions based on crystal ball gazing that you can't, as we've discovered
But the current
with Brexit.
state of the Scottish economy would not even gain EU or Euro entry.
That's absolutely true. But of course, the irony is she could actually use Brexit as an example and say, although she's so anti, she can't use it, and say, look, Brexit wasn't as bad, so if we go independent, it would probably be the same. It wouldn't.
But she's not saying that. She's saying Brexit is a disaster for Scotland. She's saying that if we became independent, we wouldn't be suffering in the same way that the UK is suffering. Because Scotland could rejoin the single market and the customs union, and then it would be able to export its goods without the restrictions that it currently faces. So it would be better off economically. So I don't know where these people are getting these arguments from.
Be as bad. It's very difficult to prove either way. I mean, to answer Esther's point of why does she keep banging on about referendum and independence, if she didn't, she'd have nothing left.
Yeah,
there's nothing left to differentiate her from the Labour Party.
There's nothing to differentiate her from the Labour Party. But she's an independence party, and the Labour Party are a unionist party. The Conservatives are a unionist party. But the SNP, see, this is something that a lot of these people don't seem to understand. They seem to think that independence came along 4 or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. But Scotland has had a campaign for independence for a long time now. The SNP have been around for decades. This is not something new. So it's not like they're jumping on some sort of bandwagon. Or they're saying, well, we need to separate ourselves from the Labour Party in some way. But this just demonstrates that these people have no understanding of Scotland and no understanding of Scottish independence. Now, I'm extremely ignorant of Scottish politics, of Scottish independence, of Scotland in general. But I think I feel that I have a better understanding of things than these people, all of them put together. Because you have Dan Wootton, who has no understanding of... He lives on another planet. You have this lady here who doesn't understand anything. The one before who keeps saying, why does she keep banging on about have a referendum? That was part of the policy. That's part of their manifesto.
Because she's failed when it comes to the Scottish health system.
How has she failed?
She's failed when it comes to the drug crisis.
How has she failed? Once again, you're just... these blanket statements. Now, when it comes to the drugs crisis, I've been speaking to some people, and they said that the criterion used for evaluating, to judge, is different. The barometer is different. The measure is different in Scotland and in England. So they're not comparable. But it's easier for politicians and their supporters in England, for example, to say, well, Scotland has failed. Because they're using a different meter to measure the data.
And so all she's got is this idea that she can promise her base a referendum once COVID is resolved, but maybe she doesn't actually want to deliver it. Of course, we'll keep on it.
Maybe she doesn't want to. Well, maybe this is finally we found a little bit of truth in all of this. Maybe Nicola Sturgeon doesn't want to have a second referendum. But I think if the time came for her... Look, I think she does, because if Scotland became independent and she was the person, in the vanguard of that, she would be remembered in Scottish history. If I was the leader of the SNP at the moment and there was a possibility of having Scottish independence, whether you agree with me or agree with Scottish independence or not, you would go down in the history books. You would be remembered in the same way that William Wallace is remembered, in the same way that Rob Roy is remembered, Robert the Bruce. You would be remembered in Scottish history for centuries. You were the one who delivered Scottish independence. Maybe not the person in charge of Scottish independence, not the one at the true leader of it, but you were the leader of the biggest party, and you got it across the line. So I doubt that she is just using it to prop up her position, because eventually you'll run out of steam if you do that. So we have GB News demonstrating once again that they have no understanding of Brexit and no understanding of Scottish independence or Scotland itself. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?